Before we dive into this incredible story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate justice, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for her true stories. You're about to witness a tale that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. My name is Sherry Abrams, and at 64, I thought I had seen the worst of human nature. I was wrong. The champagne flute slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of my Malibu estate. The sound echoed through the dining room where my family sat frozen, their faces masks of manufactured grief. But it wasn't the broken glass that made my blood run cold. It was the conversation I had just overheard from the kitchen. 2 weeks, my daughter-in-law Brittany had whispered into her phone, her voice dripping with excitement. The old bat finally gave us a timeline. We just need to be patient a little longer. Patient? My son Derek's voice was barely audible, but I caught every venomous word. Mom's been dragging this out for months. At least now we know when we'll finally be free of her constant neediness. Free of me. Their words cut deeper than any terminal diagnosis ever could. You see, 3 months ago, I had made what I thought was a clever decision. After losing my beloved husband James to a sudden heart attack, I felt utterly alone. My children, Derek, 38, and my daughter Madison, 35, had been distant since the funeral. Phone calls became shorter, visits less frequent. I began to wonder if they loved me at all, or if they were simply waiting for their inheritance. So I lied. I told them I had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 2 weeks to live, maybe 3 if I was lucky. I wanted to see if they would rally around me, show me the love I desperately craved in my final days. Instead, I discovered something far more sinister. My family wasn't just waiting for me to die, they were planning for it. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't dying. I was very much alive, sitting on a $2.8 million inheritance from James that they knew nothing about. And after what I had just overheard, I realized I had been given the greatest gift possible. The truth about who they really were. The broken champagne glass caught the light from the chandelier, each shard glittering like diamonds. How fitting, I thought, as I watched my family's concerned faces turn toward me. They had no idea that their carefully constructed world was about to shatter just as completely. "Mom, are you okay?" Madison rushed to my side, her voice coated with honey that barely concealed the poison beneath. "You look pale." I steadied myself against the dining table, my mind racing. In that moment, staring at the faces of the people I had loved unconditionally for decades, I made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted to play games, I would show them how a master plays. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, forcing a weak smile. "Just tired. The treatments are getting harder." Treatments that didn't exist. A disease I didn't have. But they didn't know that, and their relief was palpable. Derek exchanged a quick glance with Brittany, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not concern, but calculation. My own son was calculating how much longer he had to pretend to care about me. "Maybe you should rest, Mom," he said, his voice gentle but his eyes cold. "You've been pushing yourself too hard lately." I nodded, playing the part of the frail, dying woman they expected me to be. But inside, something had awakened, something fierce and unforgiving. As I made my way to my bedroom, I heard them resume their hushed conversation in the kitchen. They thought they were being careful, but grief had supposedly made me hard of hearing, not deaf. "We need to be more careful," Brittany hissed. She almost heard us. "She's too weak to put up much of a fight now," Derek replied. "Besides, even if she suspected something, what could she do? She'll be gone soon anyway." Gone soon. The words followed me up the stairs like a death sentence they had already passed. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated me. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I began to plan. I thought about my grandson, little Ethan, Derek, and Brittany's 8-year-old son. He was the only one who still looked at me with genuine love, the only one who seemed to truly mourn the thought of losing his grandmother. It was Ethan who had given me the strength to see through their deception. Just last week, he had crawled into my lap and whispered, "Grandma, I don't want you to go to heaven yet. Who will make me chocolate chip cookies?" The memory of his innocent face, streaked with real tears, hardened my resolve. If they wanted to treat me like I was already dead, then I would show them what a ghost with $2.8 million could do. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had memorized years ago, but never thought I would use. Interpol, International Criminal Police Organization. How may I direct your call? It was time to find out just how far my family's betrayal extended. And if what I suspected was true, they were about to learn that some games have consequences far more severe than they ever imagined. The hunt was about to begin. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my body thrumming with the energy I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since James's funeral, I had purpose. I had prey. Agent Isabella Chen arrived at my estate at exactly 9 a.m., as we had arranged during our encrypted phone call the night before. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her presence filled my living room with an authority that made me feel both safer and more dangerous. "Mrs. Abrams, thank you for contacting us," she said, setting up a small recording device on my coffee table. "I have to ask, are you certain about what you overheard? Financial fraud, especially involving elderly victims, is taken very seriously by our organization." I had spent the night researching, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. Brittany hadn't just been distant. She had been busy. Bank records I had never seen, investment accounts opened in my name, credit cards I never approved. They had been bleeding me dry slowly, systematically, for months. "Agent Chen, I'm not just certain, I have proof." I handed her a folder thick with documents my private investigator had gathered. Bank statements, forged signatures, medical bills for treatments I never received. The paper trail was extensive and damning. Her expression grew darker with each page. "Mrs. Abrams, this isn't just financial fraud. This is elder abuse on a massive scale. If what we're seeing here is accurate, they've stolen nearly $400,000 from your accounts over the past 8 months. 400,000? The number hit me like a physical blow. But that's not even the worst part. I showed her the medical records Brittany had forged, documenting treatments that never happened, medications I never took. They had been building a paper trail to justify my declining health, my eventual death, and their inheritance. "They're not just stealing from me," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "They're planning to kill me." Agent Chen leaned forward, her attention completely focused. "What makes you say that?" "Yesterday, I overheard Brittany on the phone. She was talking about accelerating my timeline. When I asked my doctor about it later, he said the medications on my chart could be lethal in the wrong combinations." The truth was even more sinister than I had initially realized. They weren't just waiting for me to die, they were actively planning to help me along. "We'll need to set up surveillance," Agent Chen said. "Full monitoring of their communications, financial transactions, everything. But, Mrs. Abrams, I have to warn you, this is going to be dangerous. If they suspect you know—" "They won't suspect," I interrupted. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want." That afternoon, I called Derek and Madison to my house for what I told them would be important family business. They arrived within the hour, Brittany in tow, all of them wearing expressions of solemn concern. "I want to discuss my will," I announced, settling into my favorite armchair with deliberate fragility. "I know we've avoided the subject, but with my time running short—" I watched their faces carefully. Derek's jaw tensed almost imperceptibly. Madison's eyes brightened before she quickly schooled her expression back to grief. But it was Brittany who gave herself away completely. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth before she caught herself. Mom, you don't need to think about that now, Madison said, reaching for my hand. You should focus on getting better. There is no getting better, sweetheart, I replied, squeezing her hand. The doctors were very clear. I want to make sure you're all taken care of when I'm gone. For the next hour, I laid out a fictional will that would give them everything they thought they wanted. The house, the cars, the investment accounts they knew about. I watched greed replace grief in their eyes, saw them calculating and planning even as they made sounds of protest. I've also decided to change my medical directive, I continued. I don't want to be kept alive by machines. If something happens, if I become unconscious or unable to make decisions, I want you to let me go peacefully. Derek and Brittany exchanged a look that made my skin crawl. They were already planning how to use my words against me. Are you sure, Mom? Derek asked, his voice carefully modulated. That's a big decision. I'm sure, I said firmly. I've watched too many people suffer unnecessarily. When my time comes, I want to go with dignity. After they left, I sat in my living room feeling like I had just signed my own death warrant. But Agent Chen's voice crackled through the hidden earpiece I wore. We got everything, Mrs. Abrams. They started making calls the moment they left your property. We have enough evidence to arrest them right now. Not yet, I said quietly. I want to know everything. Every lie, every scheme, every person involved. And I want them to dig their own graves so deep they'll never climb out. That evening, my phone rang. It was Dr. Harrison, my actual physician, not the fake one whose signature had been forged on my medical records. Sherry, I'm calling because I received some very disturbing information today. Someone has been accessing your medical records illegally, and there are prescriptions written in my name that I never authorized. My blood turned to ice. What kind of prescriptions? Pain medication, sedatives, and something called propofol. Sherry, these drugs, in the wrong combinations, could be fatal. I need to know, are you taking anything that wasn't prescribed by me directly? I thought about the pills Brittany had been bringing me, the ones she said would help with my pain and anxiety. I had been taking them faithfully, trusting her completely. Dr. Harrison, I need you to run a full toxicology screen on me. Tonight. And I need you to call Agent Chen at Interpol immediately. The results came back 4 hours later. I was being slowly poisoned. They weren't just planning to kill me. They had already started. The toxicology report lay spread across my kitchen table like a death sentence written in medical terminology. Agent Chen's voice was tight, with controlled fury as she read the results aloud. Elevated levels of benzodiazepines, barbiturates, and traces of digoxin. Mrs. Abrams, if you had continued taking these medications for another week, you would have gone into cardiac arrest. I stared at the innocent-looking pill bottle Brittany had given me just 3 days ago. For your anxiety, Mom, she had said, her voice dripping with fake concern. The doctor said these would help you sleep better. The doctor. The fictional doctor whose signature she had been forging for months. How long do I have? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The good news is that we caught it in time. Dr. Harrison is prescribing chelation therapy to flush your system. But Sherry, Agent Chen's voice softened, you need to understand what we're dealing with here. This isn't just financial fraud anymore. This is attempted murder. Attempted murder. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My own son, the baby I had carried for 9 months, had been poisoning me, and I had been taking the pills gratefully, thanking him for his care. I want to continue, I said firmly. I want to see how far they'll go. Absolutely not. Agent Chen shook her head. It's too dangerous. We have enough evidence to arrest them now. We can charge them with fraud, forgery, and attempted murder. And then what? I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked my perfectly manicured garden. They get good lawyers, plea bargains, serve a few years. They've destroyed my life, Agent Chen. They've stolen from me, lied to me, and tried to kill me. I want justice, not just punishment. The truth was I wanted revenge. I wanted them to feel the same helplessness, the same betrayal that had been eating away at me for months. I wanted them to know what it felt like to lose everything. There is another option, Agent Chen said slowly. We continue the investigation, but we control the narrative. We make sure you're safe while we gather evidence about their entire operation. What do you mean? We think there are others involved. The medical fraud, the forged documents, the systematic theft. This is too sophisticated for amateurs. We believe your family is part of a larger network that targets elderly victims. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You mean they've done this before? We're investigating several similar cases. Families who suddenly become very interested in their elderly relatives' health, complex financial schemes, suspicious deaths. If we can prove a connection, other families are going through this, I whispered. Other people are being murdered by the people who are supposed to love them. That night, I called Derek and Madison separately. I told Derek I was feeling much better thanks to the medication Brittany had given me, and I asked Madison to help me update my insurance policies. Both conversations were recorded, and both revealed the depth of their betrayal. I'm so glad the pills are helping, Derek said, his voice warm with false affection. Brittany researched them extensively. She really cares about your comfort. Comfort. He was talking about pills that were slowly killing me, as if they were aspirin. Madison was even more revealing. Oh, Mom, I think updating your insurance is smart. Have you thought about increasing your life insurance policy? I mean, just to make sure we can give you the funeral you deserve. The funeral I deserved. She was planning my funeral while asking me to pay for it. But it was the next morning that everything changed. I was having breakfast when Derek arrived unexpectedly, Brittany close behind. They looked agitated, nervous in a way I had never seen before. Mom, we need to talk, Derek said, his voice tight. There's been an incident. What kind of incident? Brittany stepped forward, her hands shaking. It's about Ethan. He's been asking questions about your medicine, your illness. Yesterday, he took some of your pills from your bathroom. My heart stopped. What? He's in the hospital. Derek's voice cracked. He took 6 of your anxiety pills thinking they would help him sleep better, like they help you. Mom, they're saying he might not wake up. The world tilted on its axis. Ethan, my sweet, innocent grandson, was dying because of the pills they had been using to kill me. Where is he? I demanded, grabbing my purse.
Cedars-Sinai.
Mom, the doctors are asking about the medication, about where it came from. They're saying the pills shouldn't have been prescribed to you, that they're too dangerous. I saw the fear in their eyes. They realized that their murder weapon had backfired, that their innocent child was now paying the price for their greed. We need to go, I said, but my mind was already racing ahead. This was my chance. This was how I would destroy them completely. Because while they were worried about getting caught, I was planning to make sure they never forgot the cost of their betrayal. At the hospital, I watched my grandson lying unconscious in the ICU, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that were keeping him alive. He looked so small, so fragile, so innocent. And in that moment, looking at the child who had loved me unconditionally while his parents plotted my death, I realized that revenge wasn't enough. I wanted to obliterate them. The ICU was a symphony of beeping machines and whispered conversations that held life and death in their rhythm. Ethan lay unconscious, his small chest rising and falling with the help of a ventilator. His face was pale, almost translucent, and seeing him like this ignited something primal and furious in my chest. Derek and Brittany stood on the other side of the glass, their faces masks of parental terror. But I could see something else in their eyes, the cold calculation of people weighing their options, measuring their exposure. The doctors say he ingested a lethal combination of drugs, Derek said quietly, his voice hollow. They're calling it accidental poisoning. Accidental. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Nothing about this was accidental. Dr. Patricia Wells, the pediatric intensivist, approached us with the grim efficiency of someone who delivered terrible news professionally. Mrs. Abrams, I need to ask you some questions about your medication. The pills your grandson ingested, they're not typically prescribed together and certainly not in these dosages. I felt Agent Chen's presence behind me, invisible but constant. We had planned for this moment, prepared for the confrontation that would finally expose the truth. I take what my family gives me, I said carefully. They've been so helpful managing my medical care since my diagnosis. Dr. Wells frowned, checking her tablet. I've been in contact with your physician, Dr. Harrison. He says he never prescribed these medications. In fact, he says he's been trying to reach you for weeks about some concerning discrepancies in your medical records. Derek's face went white. Brittany took a step backward, as if distance could protect her from the truth that was about to unfold. There must be some mistake, Brittany said quickly. I've been getting all of Mom's prescriptions from Dr. Mitchell's office. He's been handling her cancer treatment. There is no Dr. Mitchell in our network, Dr. Wells replied. And according to your mother's actual medical records, there is no cancer diagnosis. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my family's carefully constructed lies crumble in real time, saw the moment they realized their house of cards was collapsing. I think, I said slowly, it's time we had an honest conversation. But before anyone could respond, the machines around Ethan began to alarm. His small body convulsed, and suddenly the room was full of medical personnel pushing us out, shouting orders and running to save the life of an innocent child. We're losing him, I heard someone shout, and in that moment, I realized that revenge had a price I hadn't considered. 3 hours later, Dr. Wells emerged from the ICU with news that would change everything. He's stable, she said, and I felt Derek and Brittany collapse with relief. But there's been significant neurological damage. The combination of drugs caused prolonged oxygen deprivation to his brain. We won't know the full extent until he wakes up. But what? Derek demanded. There may be permanent cognitive impairment.
I'm sorry.
If he had received these drugs in a hospital setting with proper monitoring, this could have been prevented. If he had received these drugs in a hospital setting, the implication was clear. The medications that had nearly killed Ethan were never meant to be dispensed outside of a controlled medical environment. That night, I sat in my living room with Agent Chin, surrounded by evidence of my family's betrayal. But the satisfaction I had expected to feel was replaced by a hollow ache. Ethan's innocent face haunted me, and I realized that some victories came at too high a cost. We have everything we need, Agent Chin said quietly. The forged prescriptions, the fake medical records, the systematic theft. And now with Ethan's hospitalization, we have evidence of the real-world consequences of their actions. What happens now? We arrest them. Tomorrow morning, we'll have Derek and Brittany in custody. The district attorney is prepared to file charges for fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and reckless endangerment of a child. And Madison? She's been cooperating with the investigation. It appears she was being manipulated by Derek and Brittany, led to believe that your medical expenses were legitimate. She's willing to testify against them. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt empty. There's something else, Agent Chin continued. We've connected Derek and Brittany to a network of similar cases. They're part of a group that specifically targets elderly individuals with significant assets. You weren't their first victim, Mrs. Abrams. You were just their biggest score. The next morning, I watched from my bedroom window as Derek and Brittany were led away in handcuffs. Derek turned to look back at the house, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been regret in his eyes. But then he looked away, and I realized that even facing arrest, he was still calculating, still looking for an angle. Madison arrived an hour later, her face streaked with tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what they were doing." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw the truth in her eyes. She had been a victim too, manipulated and used by people she trusted. "I know, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into my arms. "I know." But even as I comforted my daughter, I knew that this was just the beginning. Derek and Brittany had destroyed my family, nearly killed my grandson, and betrayed everything I had spent my life building. They wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But they were about to learn that some games have consequences that last forever. The arraignment was a media circus. Derek and Brittany, both handcuffed and dressed in orange jumpsuits, stood before Judge Martinez as the charges were read. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse, reckless endangerment of a child, and attempted murder. The list seemed endless. I sat in the gallery, watching my son's face as he heard the evidence against him. Each charge carried years in prison, and I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in months. But this was just the beginning. "Your Honor," Derek's lawyer began, "my client maintains his innocence. He was simply trying to help his elderly mother manage her medical care during a difficult time." The lawyer was expensive. I recognized him from high-profile cases covered in the media. Someone was funding Derek's defense, and I had a pretty good idea who. Agent Chen leaned over to whisper, "We've traced significant payments to Derek's legal team. They're coming from offshore accounts connected to the larger network we've been investigating." After the hearing, I drove to Cedars-Sinai to check on Ethan. He had been awake for 2 days now, but the doctors were concerned about his cognitive function. When I entered his room, he looked up at me with confused eyes. "Grandma, why am I in the hospital?" "You had an accident, sweetheart. But you're going to be okay." "Where's Mommy and Daddy?" The question cut through me like a knife. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his parents are in jail for trying to murder his grandmother? "They're dealing with some grown-up problems right now," I said carefully. "But I'm here, and I'm going to take care of you." Madison appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Mom, we need to talk. The lawyers are saying Derek and Brittany might get bail." "Over my dead body," I said, then realized the irony of my words. Actually, that was exactly their plan. That evening, I sat in my study, surrounded by legal documents and financial records. I had $2. $8 million at my disposal, and I intended to use every penny to ensure that Derek and Brittany paid for what they had done. But money, I realized, was just one weapon in my arsenal. I had something far more powerful: the truth. I called a press conference for the next morning. Standing on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and cameras, I told my story. I showed the forged medical records, the fake prescriptions, the evidence of systematic theft. I held up pictures of Ethan in the hospital, innocent and vulnerable. "My son and daughter-in-law didn't just try to steal my money," I said, my voice carrying across the crowd. "They tried to steal my life. And in the process, they nearly killed my grandson." The story went viral within hours. #JusticeForSherry began trending on social media. News outlets picked up the story, and suddenly Derek and Brittany's faces were everywhere, labeled as monsters who had preyed on a vulnerable elderly woman. But I wasn't done. I had Madison help me research Derek and Brittany's professional lives. Derek was a financial advisor with a prestigious firm downtown. Brittany was a nurse at a private medical practice. Both positions required trust, integrity, and clean criminal records. Within a week, both had been terminated from their jobs. Derek's clients began demanding their money back, terrified that they had been scammed. Brittany's medical license was suspended pending investigation. But it was the personal fallout that really satisfied me. Their friends abandoned them. Their social media accounts were flooded with angry messages. They couldn't show their faces in public without being recognized and confronted. "You're destroying them," Agent Chin observed during one of our meetings. "They destroyed themselves," I replied. "I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." The bail hearing was a circus. Derek and Brittany's lawyers argued that they posed no flight risk, that they had ties to the community, that they were presumed innocent. The prosecutor countered with evidence of their extensive criminal network and the ongoing threat they posed to elderly victims. I took the stand as a witness, telling the court about months of systematic abuse, about the slow poisoning, about watching my grandson nearly die from the drugs they had been using to kill me. "Your Honor," I said, looking directly at Derek and Brittany, "these people stole my money, my health, and my trust. They nearly killed my grandson. They're not just criminals, they're predators who target the most vulnerable members of our society." The judge denied bail. Derek and Brittany would remain in custody until trial. As they were led away, Derek turned to look at me one last time. His eyes were filled with hatred, but also with something else, defeat. He was beginning to understand that I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting for total annihilation. That night, I received a call from an unexpected source. It was Janet Morrison, an elderly woman from Phoenix whose story was remarkably similar to mine. "I saw you on the news," she said, her voice shaking. "The same thing happened to me. My daughter and her husband, they took everything. But I was too ashamed to come forward." "You're not alone," I told her. "And it's not too late." Over the next few weeks, more victims came forward. Elderly men and women who had been targeted by the same network, who had been systematically abused and robbed by people they trusted. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. But with each new victim who found the courage to speak out, I felt my resolve strengthen. This wasn't just about Derek and Brittany anymore. This was about every elderly person who had been betrayed, every family that had been torn apart by greed. I was no longer just seeking revenge. I was leading a revolution. The FBI raid on Derek and Brittany's home was televised live. I watched from my living room as agents carried out boxes of evidence, computer hard drives, and financial records. Agent Chen had called to tell me they had uncovered something massive, a sophisticated criminal network that had been operating for years. "Mrs. Abrams, what we found goes beyond anything we initially suspected," Agent Chen said during our debriefing. "Your son and daughter-in-law weren't just operating independently. They were part of a nationwide network of families targeting elderly relatives with significant assets." She spread photographs across my dining room table. Faces of elderly men and women, all with the same haunted expression I had seen in my own mirror months ago. Victims who had been betrayed by the people they trusted most. 17 confirmed cases so far, Agent Chin continued. And we believe there are more. The network has been operating for at least 5 years, with total estimated theft exceeding $50 million. $50 million. The number was staggering, but what hurt more was the human cost. 17 families destroyed, 17 elderly people who had died thinking their loved ones had abandoned them. "How does it work?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "It's sophisticated. They identify elderly individuals with significant assets, but limited social connections. Usually widows or widowers whose children have moved away. They cultivate the relationship, gain access to medical and financial information, then systematically drain the accounts while creating false medical records to justify the decline in health. And if the victim gets suspicious?" Agent Chen's expression darkened. "They accelerate the timeline, like they did with you." My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. It was Madison calling from the hospital. "Mom, you need to come now. Ethan's asking for you, and the doctors want to run more tests." I found my grandson sitting up in bed, looking more alert than he had since the poisoning. But when he saw me, his face crumpled.
Grandma, I'm scared.
I can't remember things right. And everyone keeps asking me about pills. I sat beside him, taking his small hand in mine. What do you remember about the pills, sweetheart? Mommy said they were special medicine to help sick people feel better. She said you needed them to get well, but that I should never touch them because they were too strong for kids. But you took them anyway? His eyes filled with tears. I heard Mommy and Daddy talking about how you were going to heaven soon. I thought if I took the same medicine, maybe I could get sick too and go with you. I didn't want you to be alone. The innocence of his words broke my heart. Even in his confused state, he was still more loving than the adults who had raised him. Ethan, honey, I'm not going anywhere. And you're going to get better, I promise. But even as I said the words, I knew they might not be true. The neurological damage from the poisoning was becoming more apparent each day. My grandson, who had been reading at a 5th grade level, was now struggling with basic arithmetic. The child who had dreamed of becoming a scientist might never recover the cognitive function he had lost. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called a meeting of all the identified victims and their families. We gathered in the conference room of a downtown hotel, 17 families united by betrayal and loss. Some victims were still alive, others had died believing their families had abandoned them. We can't just wait for the criminal justice system, I told the group. Derek and Brittany are just two people in a much larger network. Even if they go to prison, others will take their place. Margaret Foster, an 82-year-old widow from San Diego, raised her hand. What do you propose we do? We're all old, we're all tired, and most of us have already lost everything. We fight back, I said simply. We expose the entire network. We make sure that everyone involved pays for what they've done, not just legally, but personally and professionally. I had been planning this for weeks, researching every person connected to the network. Lawyers who had helped forge documents, doctors who had signed fake prescriptions, financial advisors who had laundered stolen money. I had their names, their addresses, their professional licenses. This is bigger than just getting our money back, I continued. This is about making sure that no other elderly person has to go through what we've experienced. Over the next 3 hours, we planned a coordinated campaign of exposure. Each victim would tell their story to local media, file complaints with professional licensing boards, and pursue civil lawsuits against everyone involved. We would attack the network from every angle, systematically destroying the careers and reputations of everyone who had participated. But I had a special plan for Derek and Brittany. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Derek's lawyer. Mrs. Abrams, my client would like to arrange a meeting. He's prepared to make a deal. What kind of deal? Full cooperation with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. He has information about the network that could be valuable to law enforcement. I agreed to meet at the county jail, with Agent Chin present. Derek looked different, thinner, pale, his expensive suits replaced by orange prison garb. But his eyes still held that calculating look I had come to despise. Mom, he said as I sat across from him, I want to explain. There's nothing to explain, I replied coldly. You tried to kill me for money. Your son is brain damaged because of your greed. What could you possibly say that would justify that? I was in debt, he said desperately. The network, they had something on me. They threatened to expose some financial irregularities unless I cooperated. So you chose to murder your mother instead of facing the consequences of your actions? Derek's composure cracked. I never meant for it to go this far. The poisoning, that was Brittany's idea. I just wanted to scare you into signing over power of attorney. And Ethan? That was an accident.
Un terrible accident.
I stood up, looking down at the man who had once been my son. Derek, you're going to prison for the rest of your life. But that's not enough. I'm going to make sure that everyone you've ever known understands exactly what kind of monster you are. As I walked away, I heard him calling after me, but I didn't turn back. I had said everything I needed to say. The real work was just beginning. The trial began 6 months later, and I was ready. I had spent every day since Derek's pathetic plea for mercy building an empire of evidence, a fortress of facts that would crush him and Brittany completely. The courthouse steps had become my stage. Every morning, I stood before the cameras with a new revelation, a new piece of evidence, a new victim who had found the courage to speak. The media had dubbed me the avenging grandmother, and I wore the title like armor. Today, we'll hear testimony about how my son Derek systematically targeted elderly clients at his financial firm. I announced to the gathered reporters. Not just me, but 17 other victims who trusted him with their life savings. Behind me stood Margaret Foster, Janet Morrison, and 12 other survivors. We had become an army of the betrayed, and our weapons were truth and relentless determination. Inside the courtroom, Derek and Brittany sat at separate defense tables. Their lawyers had managed to sever their cases, hoping to create doubt about who was responsible for what. But Agent Chun and I had prepared for this strategy. District Attorney Williams was a prosecutor known for his methodical approach to complex financial crimes. During opening statements, he laid out the network's operation with surgical precision. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you're about to hear is not a family dispute gone wrong. This is a calculated, systematic campaign of elder abuse that operated like a business. The defendants didn't just steal money. They murdered trust, they destroyed families, and they left a trail of devastation that spans multiple states. Derek's lawyer, the expensive one paid for with stolen money, tried to paint his client as a victim of manipulation. Derek Abrams was coerced into this scheme by his wife, Brittany. He's actually another victim of her psychological manipulation. I almost laughed. Even facing life in prison, Derek was still trying to shift blame. But it was during my testimony that I delivered the killing blow. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit 247, I said, producing a flash drive. These are recordings I made of every conversation with my son and daughter-in-law over the past 6 months, including their discussions about accelerating my death. The courtroom fell silent as my voice played through the speakers, followed by Derek's cold, calculated responses about managing my timeline and ensuring a clean transition. Did you hear your son express any remorse in these recordings? D.A. Williams asked. No, I replied, my voice steady. The only emotion I heard was frustration that I was taking too long to die. Derek's face had gone ashen. He hadn't known about the recordings, hadn't known that every word of his manufactured grief had been captured for posterity. But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source, Brittany herself. 3 weeks into the trial, her lawyer announced that she was ready to testify against Derek in exchange for a plea deal. I watched from the gallery as my former daughter-in-law took the stand, her blonde hair now stringy and unkempt, her designer clothes replaced by a simple gray suit. Derek was the mastermind, she said, her voice barely audible. He recruited me into the network before we even got married. He said his mother was a perfect target, wealthy, isolated, trusting. When did you first agree to participate in defrauding Mrs. Abrams? The prosecutor asked. Before our wedding. Derek said we needed her money for our future, for Ethan's education. He made it sound like we were just borrowing against our inheritance. And the poisoning? Brittany's voice broke. Derek said we needed to speed things up. The network was pressuring him for results, threatening to expose us if we didn't deliver soon. He researched the drug combinations, told me exactly what to give her and when. Did you know these drugs could be fatal? Derek said they would just make her confused, compliant. He said elderly people died from their medications all the time, that no one would question it. I felt a cold satisfaction watching Derek's defense crumble. His own wife was destroying him, and there was nothing his expensive lawyer could do to stop it. But the trial was just one front in my war. While the proceedings continued, I had been systematically destroying every other aspect of Derek and Brittany's lives. Their house had been seized as proceeds of crime. Their bank accounts were frozen. Their credit was ruined. I had also gone after everyone who had enabled them. Dr. Samuel Richards, who had accepted bribes to sign fake prescriptions, lost his medical license and was facing criminal charges. Attorney Patricia Webb, who had helped draft fraudulent documents, was disbarred and under investigation. Financial advisor Mark Chen, no relation to Agent Chen, had his assets frozen and his clients fleeing en masse. "You're being very thorough," Agent Chen observed during one of our meetings. "I'm being just," I corrected. "Every person who participated in this network profited from the abuse of elderly victims. They all need to face consequences." But perhaps the most satisfying destruction was social. Derek and Brittany's friends had abandoned them completely. Their social media profiles, once filled with pictures of their perfect family life, were now monuments to their disgrace. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid them. Neighbors refused to make eye contact. I had made them pariahs, outcasts in their own community. The trial lasted 8 weeks. During that time, 17 victims testified about their experiences. Financial experts explained how the network operated. Medical professionals detailed the effects of the systematic poisoning. But it was Ethan's testimony, delivered via video link from a hospital, that sealed Derek's fate. "My daddy told me that Grandma was sick and that her medicine would help her feel better," he said in his halting, damaged speech. "He said I should never touch the medicine because it was too strong for kids. But when I heard them talking about Grandma going to heaven, I wanted to go with her so she wouldn't be alone." The jury was in tears. 2 jurors were openly sobbing. Derek was convicted on all counts: fraud, forgery, elder abuse, reckless endangerment of a child, and attempted murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Brittany, who had testified against him, received 25 years. As they were led away, Derek turned to look at me one last time. I met his gaze with cold satisfaction. "I told you there would be consequences," I mouthed silently. He looked away, broken and defeated. But even as I watched my son disappear into the prison system forever, I knew my work wasn't finished. The network was larger than just Derek and Brittany, and there were still elderly victims out there who needed justice. I had tasted victory, and I wanted more. 6 months after Derek's conviction, I stood in the boardroom of Morrison and Associates, the law firm that would be handling the largest class action lawsuit in elder abuse history. 43 victims across 7 states had joined our cause, representing over $75 million in stolen assets and immeasurable human suffering. Mrs. Abrams, lead attorney David Morrison, said, "Your willingness to be the public face of this lawsuit has given dozens of other victims the courage to come forward. We're talking about systemic change in how elder abuse is prosecuted and prevented." I looked around the table at the faces of my fellow survivors. Margaret Foster, now 83, had recovered $2.3 million that her son had stolen. Janet Morrison had seen her daughter sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Each of us carried scars, but we also carried the satisfaction of justice served. "It's not enough to get our money back," I said. "We need to make sure this never happens again." The civil lawsuits were just beginning. We were going after the banks that had failed to report suspicious transactions, the medical facilities that had allowed unauthorized access to records, the insurance companies that had processed fraudulent claims. Every institution that had enabled the network would face financial consequences. But my personal vendetta was far from over. I had hired a team of private investigators to track down every asset Derek and Brittany had ever owned, every connection they had ever made, every person who had ever benefited from their crimes. I wanted to ensure that their financial destruction was as complete as their moral bankruptcy. Ma'am, my lead investigator, former FBI agent Patricia Santos, reported during our weekly meeting, we've located offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands totaling $4.2 million. It appears Derek was siphoning money not just from you, but from the entire network's operations. Can we recover it? With the Interpol connections we've established, yes. But there's more. We've found evidence that Derek was planning to flee the country. He had false passports, plane tickets to non-extradition countries, the works. I felt a chill of satisfaction. Even in prison, Derek had been harboring escape fantasies. This evidence would ensure that he never saw the outside of a prison cell again. The psychological warfare was equally satisfying. I had made sure that every correctional facility newsletter in the federal system carried stories about the elder abuse network. Derek's fellow inmates knew exactly what kind of monster he was, and prison justice had its own way of dealing with people who hurt elderly victims. Brittany's situation was even more desperate. Her cooperation with prosecutors had earned her a reduced sentence, but it had also made her a target. Other members of the network, still awaiting trial, saw her as a liability. She had been moved to protective custody 3 times after credible threats against her life. She's completely isolated, Agent Chin reported. No visitors, no phone calls, no commissary money. Even her own family has disowned her. Good, I said simply. She made her choice when she decided to poison me. But it was the impact on their extended family that provided the deepest satisfaction. Derek's in-laws had been so horrified by his crimes that they had legally changed their family name. Brittany's sister had written a public letter disowning her, which had been published in newspapers across the country. Most importantly, I had been granted full custody of Ethan. My grandson was making slow, but steady progress. The brain damage had affected his processing speed and short-term memory, but his fundamental personality remained unchanged. He was still the loving, curious child I remembered, just wrapped in a more fragile package. "Grandma," he said one evening as we worked on his homework together, "why did Mommy and Daddy do bad things?" It was a question I had been dreading, but also preparing for. Sometimes, sweetheart, people make very bad choices. They let greed and selfishness take over their hearts, and they forget about love and family. But they're still my parents. Yes, they are. And that's not your fault, and it doesn't change how much I love you. I had been working with child psychologists to help Ethan process his trauma. The doctors said that children were remarkably resilient, that with proper support, he could still live a full and happy life. But I also made sure he understood the consequences of his parents' actions. Not to hurt him, but to ensure that he never forgot the cost of betrayal. A year after the convictions, I received an unexpected visitor. Madison stood on my doorstep, holding a suitcase and looking exhausted. "Mom, I lost my job," she said without preamble. The association with Derek and Brittany, the media attention. Nobody wants to hire the sister of a convicted elder abuser. I let her in, but I didn't offer comfort. You chose to believe their lies for months, Madison. You never questioned why I was suddenly so sick, why I needed so much medication. I trusted them. I thought they were taking care of you. You trusted them because it was easier than getting involved yourself. You were happy to let someone else handle the burden of an aging parent. Madison's face crumpled. I know I failed you. I know I should have been more involved, should have asked more questions. But, Mom, I'm trying to make it right now. By coming here, because you have nowhere else to go? The words were harsh, but they were true. Madison had only returned to me when she had exhausted all other options. I want to help, she said quietly. With Ethan, with the lawsuits, with whatever you need. I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or continued self-interest. What I saw was a broken woman who had finally understood the cost of her neglect. "You can stay," I said finally. "But you earn your place here. You help with Ethan's therapy, you assist with the legal cases, and you prove to me every single day that you've learned from this experience." Madison nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will, Mom. I promise." As I watched my daughter unpack her belongings into the guest room, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction at her humbling, anger at her past negligence, but also a small seed of hope that perhaps some relationships could be rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. But even as I contemplated the possibility of reconciliation with Madison, I knew that Derek and Brittany would never receive such mercy from me. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. 2 years after Derek's conviction, I received a letter that would give me the ultimate satisfaction. It was from Derek himself, written in the shaky handwriting of a man whose spirit had been completely broken. "Mom, I know you'll probably throw this away without reading it, but I had to try. I've had 2 years to think about what I did, and I finally understand the magnitude of my betrayal. I destroyed everything good in my life for money I didn't even need. Ethan writes to me sometimes. The letters are simple, childlike, nothing like the brilliant boy he used to be. I know that's my fault. I know I stole his future along with your trust. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. You were right to destroy me. You were right to make me pay for what I did. Prison is hell, but it's the hell I earned. Every day, I live with the knowledge that I tried to murder the woman who gave me life, who loved me unconditionally for 38 years. Please tell Ethan that his father is sorry. Please tell him that the man who hurt his grandmother wasn't really his father, just a monster wearing his father's face.
I love you, Mom.
I know those words are meaningless now, but they're all I have left. Derek." I read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in my desk drawer. Not because I was moved by his words, but because I wanted to preserve this moment, the moment when Derek finally acknowledged the depth of his crimes. But words on paper weren't enough. I wanted to see his face when he delivered his apology. I arranged a visit to the federal penitentiary, where Derek was serving his life sentence. The facility was a fortress of concrete and steel, designed to hold society's most dangerous criminals. As I passed through multiple security checkpoints, I felt a grim satisfaction, knowing that Derek would never leave this place. He looked older than his 40 years when he was brought to the visiting room. His hair had gone completely gray, his face was gaunt, and his expensive veneers had been replaced with the standard dental work of the incarcerated. But it was his eyes that showed the real change. They were hollow, defeated, empty of the calculating intelligence that had once defined him. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You came." "I wanted to see what justice looks like," I replied. We sat across from each other at a metal table, separated by an invisible chasm of betrayal that could never be bridged. "I meant what I wrote in the letter," Derek said. "I understand now what I did to you, to our family, to Ethan. Do you understand why I destroyed your life so completely?" Derek nodded slowly. "Because I tried to destroy yours. Because I chose money over family. Because I became a monster. And because you showed no remorse until you were caught. Because you looked me in the eye every day while you poisoned me and felt nothing but impatience that I wasn't dying fast enough. I know. I replay those moments every night. I see your face when you took those pills, trusting me completely, and I hate myself more than I thought possible." I leaned forward, my voice deadly quiet. "Good. I want you to hate yourself. I want you to spend every remaining day of your life knowing that you are a monster who destroyed an innocent child's mind for money you didn't even need." Derek's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down his face as he buried his head in his hands. "I would take it all back if I could. I would trade places with Ethan, give him back his brilliant mind, restore everything I destroyed. But you can't, I said simply. You made your choices, and now you live with the consequences. I stood to leave, but Derek called out desperately.
Mom, please.
I know I don't deserve it, but do you think you could ever forgive me? I turned back to look at my son one last time. Derek, forgiveness is for people who deserve a second chance. You forfeited that right when you decided to murder me. As I walked away, I heard him sobbing behind me, but I didn't turn back. I had said everything I needed to say. The drive home took me past the cemetery where James was buried. I stopped to visit his grave, something I did every month without fail. I did it, darling, I said to his headstone. I made them pay for everything. Derek will die in prison. Brittany has lost everything, and the entire network has been destroyed. I placed fresh flowers on his grave and sat on the bench we had installed there together years ago. Ethan is safe now. He's getting better every day, slowly but surely. Madison is trying to rebuild her relationship with us, and I think I might let her. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I could almost feel James's presence beside me. The lawsuits are almost finished. We've recovered most of the stolen money, and dozens of victims have found justice. I did what I set out to do. But even as I spoke the words, I knew that victory felt different than I had expected. The satisfaction was real, but it was tempered by the cost. Derek was my son, regardless of his crimes, and destroying him had taken something from me as well. I don't regret it, I said firmly. He made his choice when he decided to betray our family. But, James, I miss the boy he used to be. I miss the son I thought he was. As the sun set behind the hills, I made my peace with the choices I had made. Derek and Brittany had gotten exactly what they deserved, and I had ensured that dozens of other elderly victims would never face the same betrayal. I had won my war completely and totally. But some victories, I realized, came with scars that never fully healed. 3 years after Derek's conviction, I stood in the marble-floored lobby of Abrams Luxury Estates, the most exclusive real estate empire on the West Coast. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had built this billion-dollar company using Derek's stolen inheritance as seed money, transforming his betrayal into my greatest triumph. Mrs. Abrams, my assistant Victoria, approached with a tablet. The Forbes interview is scheduled for 2 p.m., and the documentary crew wants to film your closing statement at the Malibu property. At 67, I had become something I never expected, a business mogul. After recovering my stolen money and winning massive civil settlements, I had invested everything into luxury real estate. But not just any real estate. I specialized in creating secure, monitored communities specifically designed for wealthy elderly clients who had been betrayed by their families. Sanctuary Estates, as my developments were known, featured 24/7 medical monitoring, financial oversight services, and psychological support staff. Every resident had been a victim of elder abuse, and every property was a fortress of safety and dignity. But the real satisfaction came from something else entirely. Has the new resident settled in well? I asked Victoria as we walked through the pristine corridors lined with original artwork. Mrs. Foster is adapting beautifully. She says it's the first time in years she's felt truly safe. Margaret Foster, the 86-year-old woman whose son had stolen her fortune, was now living in a $3 million penthouse overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Her son was serving 15 years in federal prison, and his stolen money had paid for her new home. It was poetic justice. The money stolen from victims was now funding their luxurious recovery. And the other matter? I asked quietly. Victoria's expression darkened with satisfaction. The surveillance footage has been sent to the appropriate authorities. Mr. Peterson won't be bothering his elderly neighbors anymore. This was my secret satisfaction, My developments weren't just sanctuaries for victims. They were hunting grounds for predators. You see, con artists and elder abusers couldn't resist wealthy elderly communities. They circled like vultures, looking for new victims. But what they didn't know was that every vulnerable resident in my properties was actually a decoy, trained actors working with law enforcement to catch predators in the act. In 3 years, we had caught and convicted over 60 criminals who had come hunting for easy targets. They thought they were finding vulnerable elderly people. Instead, they found elaborate stings that ended with life sentences. "Mrs. Abrams?" A familiar voice called out behind me. I turned to see Agent Chen, now director of the FBI's Elder Crimes Division. She visited monthly to coordinate our ongoing operations. "Isabella, how did the Patterson case go?" "Convicted on all counts. 30 years federal time. He thought he was targeting a lonely widow with dementia. Instead, he got Detective Rodriguez playing the role of her lifetime." I smiled with cold satisfaction. James Patterson had tried to romance and rob 3 elderly women before setting his sights on our fictional Mrs. Williams. Now he would spend the rest of his life in prison, caught on camera attempting to forge financial documents. "Any word from our friends in federal custody?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Derek's been denied his 4th appeal. Brittany's latest parole hearing was rejected unanimously. "They're never getting out, Sherry." Good. Some things never got old. As we walked through the property, I checked on our most special resident. Ethan, now 11, lived with Madison and me in the penthouse suite I had designed specifically for our family. The brain damage would always be with him, but he was thriving in ways that constantly amazed me. "Grandma," he called out as I entered our private living area. "Look what I painted." His artwork covered the walls, abstract pieces that, while simple, showed remarkable emotional depth. His damaged mind had found new ways to express itself, and while he would never be the scientist he'd once dreamed of becoming, he had become something else, a survivor with an artist's soul. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. What do you call it?" "Justice," he said simply. "It's all the colors of justice." Madison appeared from the kitchen, her arms full of groceries. Over the past 3 years, she had transformed from the neglectful daughter who had enabled Derek's abuse into someone I could actually trust. She now managed our community's victim services, helping new residents adjust to their lives of luxury and safety. "Mom," she said, "I have news." The Peterson conviction made the national news. "They're calling this place the honeypot for elder abuse predators." "Good," I replied. "Let them know what happens when they target elderly people." That evening, I stood on my private balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean, holding a glass of the most expensive champagne money could buy. 3 properties now bore the Abrams name, housing over 200 elder abuse survivors in luxury that most people could only dream of. But the real luxury was safety. Security. The knowledge that predators who came hunting for vulnerable elderly victims would instead find themselves trapped in an elaborate web that would destroy their lives. My phone buzzed with a message from my private investigator. Patricia Santos still worked for me, but now her job was much more interesting. Derek's cellmate says he's been crying every night for the past month. Apparently, he found out about your real estate empire from a Forbes article someone left in the prison library. He knows you used his stolen money to build something he could never destroy. I smiled, imagining Derek in his concrete cell, realizing that his betrayal had funded my triumph. Every luxury condo, every security system, every trap we set for elder abusers, all of it paid for with money he had stolen from me. The ultimate irony. Derek's greed had created the very system that would prevent thousands of other families from experiencing what ours had endured. "Mrs. Abrams?" Victoria's voice came through the intercom. "There's someone here to see you. Says her name is Linda Walsh, and she has a story about her daughter that she thinks you'd want to hear." "Another victim?" Another family destroyed by betrayal. Another opportunity for justice. Send her up, I said. As I waited for the elevator, I thought about the empire I had built from the ashes of my family's destruction. Derek and Brittany were rotting in prison, their names synonymous with elder abuse. But I had become something more powerful than they could have ever imagined. A protector, a hunter, a force of nature that predators learned to fear. Linda Walsh emerged from the elevator, an elegant woman in her 70s with the haunted expression I had come to recognize in victims of family betrayal. "Mrs. Abrams," she said, her voice shaking, "my daughter has been stealing from me for 2 years. She's convinced everyone I have dementia, but I'm perfectly aware of what she's doing. I saw your interview on 60 Minutes and I thought, I hoped. You hoped I could help you get justice?
Yes.
But more than that, I hoped you could make sure she pays for what she's done. Really pays." I smiled, the expression cold and satisfied. "Mrs. Walsh, you've come to exactly the right place." As I led her into my office to begin planning her daughter's destruction, I felt the familiar thrill of the hunt beginning. Another predator was about to learn that some prey fought back with devastating consequences. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his innocent face bright with curiosity. "Grandma, are you helping another family?" "Yes, sweetheart. We're making sure the bad people can't hurt anyone else." "Good," he said with the simple wisdom that brain damage hadn't touched. "Bad people should be stopped." From the mouths of babes. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I reflected on the empire I had built. 3 luxury developments, housing hundreds of survivors. Dozens of criminals caught and convicted. A business worth over $1 billion, all funded by the very money that was supposed to buy my death. Derek had wanted to inherit my wealth. Instead, his crimes had created wealth beyond his wildest dreams, wealth that would never be his, wealth that existed solely to destroy people like him. Some would call it revenge. I called it evolution. I had transformed from victim to predator, from prey to hunter, from a dying woman to an unstoppable force of justice. And I was just getting started. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of justice and redemption. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the elderly people in your own life, please subscribe to Her True Stories and hit that notification bell. Share this story with others who need to hear it, because together, we can protect our most vulnerable family members from those who would exploit their trust. Remember, sometimes the best revenge is success so complete that your enemies can only watch helplessly as you build an empire from their failures. Until next time, this is Sherry Abrams, reminding you that the best way to defeat monsters is to become something they could never imagine. Until next time, stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone convince you that family loyalty means accepting abuse.